On the frozen bridge cutting through Manhattan, Leon Carter slammed the brakes as a black limousine spun away from the guardrail and vanished into the Hudson. Crowds raised their phones. Only he jumped. The water cut like knives, and Leon dragged an unconscious blonde woman from the sinking car, pressing his breath into her blue lips until her chest jerked upward. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts. She opened her eyes ice blue, stunned. He did not yet know she was Callista Sterling, the billionaire heiress. That life-saving kiss was about to change his life and destroy it. The city does not forgive. That truth had carved itself into Leon Carter's bones during 9 years behind concrete walls. 9 years that began with a stupid decision at 20 and a security guard's heart stopping on a convenience store floor. Leon had not pulled the trigger because there was no gun. He had not thrown the first punch because the plan was supposed to be simple. Walk in, take the cash, walk out. But plans made by desperate boys rarely survive contact with reality. The guard, Marcus Holloway, 61 years old, father of 3, veteran of 2 wars, collapsed clutching his chest while Leon's accomplice fled through the back door. Leon stayed. He called 911. He performed CPR the way he had learned in a high school health class, pumping the old man's chest while sirens screamed closer. Marcus Holloway died anyway. The law read robbery resulting in death, and the law did not care that Leon had tried to save him. The judge called it accountability. The cell block called it weakness. Leon called it the end of the person he thought he might become. Now, at 35, Leon drove strangers through Queens in a car that smelled like old coffee and someone else's perfume, the scent of 1,000 anonymous lives passing through. His apartment occupied the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked 1 week out of 3, and the walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbors' television game shows and arguments and late-night crying. He worked 11 hours on good days, 12 or 13 on most days, stitching together rides from LaGuardia to Midtown, from Brooklyn Heights back to the airport, from office buildings to bars to hotels, an endless loop that kept the lights on and his daughter fed, Astrid, 8 years old. Brown curls pulled into a high ponytail that bounced when she ran, a backpack perpetually bigger than her small torso, a smile that could crack him in half. Astrid Carter did not know the whole story yet. She knew her father had made mistakes before she was born, mistakes serious enough that some parents at school whispered when he arrived late for pickup. She knew the word prison in an abstract way, the way children know about dinosaurs or ancient Rome, real but distant. She was beginning to understand, with the terrible clarity that comes to smart children, that her father was different from other fathers, that the label criminal record stuck longer and harder than any glue. What she did not know, because Leon would saw off his own arm before telling her, was that one of her classmates' mothers had discovered his mugshot online 3 weeks ago and was now quietly campaigning to have him banned from school events. The words dangerous and unfit had been used in emails Leon was not supposed to see. The principal had assured him it would blow over. Leon did not believe her. Leon kept a glass jar on the kitchen counter, the kind that once held pasta sauce, now labeled college in Astrid's careful handwriting, each letter outlined twice in purple marker. Inside were crumpled bills and loose change, dollar after dollar saved from tips he should have spent on himself on new shoes to replace the ones with the separated sole, on a winter coat that did not have a broken zipper, on anything that might make him feel like less of a ghost moving through the world. At night, after Astrid fell asleep in the bed they had bought from a thrift store and assembled together with a screwdriver and patience, Leon would sit at the edge of their small sofa and fold the blankets into neat squares, arrange the coffee table books they did not own, wipe down surfaces until everything looked intentional. He did not want Astrid to wake up and see chaos. He wanted her to believe their life was a choice, not a consequence. The night of the accident, Leon had been driving for 9 straight hours. His back ached in that deep way that no amount of stretching could fix. His eyes burned from staring at taillights and GPS screens. He was exactly 17 minutes away from picking up Astrid from Ruth Bennett's after-school program, and Ruth Bennett had reminded him twice that month that punctuality mattered, that the other parents did not have to wait, that perhaps Leon should consider his priorities. Leon was considering them when he saw the traffic seize up ahead, brake lights blazing like a river of red. Then he saw the semi-truck jackknife on a sheet of black ice, invisible to everyone until it was too late, its trailer swinging wide like a fist looking for a face to hit. The limousine, black, sleek, probably worth more than Leon would earn in 5 years, got clipped at the rear axle, spun twice in a horrible pirouette of metal and glass, and tore through the guardrail like it was made of paper. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Just the dull glow of taillights sinking beneath the dark surface of the Hudson River. Leon gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. He could see his reflection in the rearview mirror, tired eyes, 2-day stubble, the face of a man who had learned to make himself invisible. Every instinct he had developed in prison told him to stay in the car, to let someone else be the hero, because men with his record did not get the benefit of the doubt. They got suspicion, They got accusations. They got their motives questioned even when their actions were pure. He thought about Marcus Holloway, about performing CPR on a dying man and still going to prison. He thought about Astrid, waiting at school, checking the clock, wondering if her father had forgotten her again. He thought about the question she had asked him 2 nights earlier, her voice small and serious in the dark. "Dad, are you a bad person?" Leon kicked off his shoes, threw his phone onto the passenger seat, and vaulted the broken guardrail. The water was a scream. It hit him like a wall of knives, crushed the air from his lungs, turned his muscles into lead. He swam down, following the red glow of the taillights, and found the limousine resting on its side against the river bottom. The driver's seat was empty, the door hanging open. The back seat held a woman in a cream-colored dress that billowed around her like a ghost, her blonde hair floating, her face slack. The rear window had a spiderweb crack spreading across the glass. Leon pried at the door. Water pressure fought him, his chest burned. Black spots crowded the edges of his vision. He braced his feet against the car frame and pulled, every muscle screaming, until the door gave way with a rush of bubbles. He grabbed the woman under the arms and kicked off the car, pulling them both toward the surface. His lungs were on fire. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. When they broke into the air, Leon gasped so hard he thought his ribs might crack. The riverbank was stone and winter ice, slick and unforgiving. Leon dragged the woman onto the concrete, rolled her onto her back, tilted her head to clear her airway, no pulse at her neck. No rise and fall of her chest, no breath clouding in the frozen air. He locked his hands over her sternum, one palm over the other, and started compressions. 30 pumps, fast and hard, counting aloud so he would not lose rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, keep going, 28, 29, 30. Then he pinched her nose, sealed his mouth over hers, and breathed. 2 breaths. He tasted river water and the faint trace of champagne on her lips, tasted the cold and the salt and the strange intimacy of breathing for another person. Again, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. A crowd had formed above on the bridge, phones out, recording everything. Someone shouted to call 911. Leon did not stop. He counted, he compressed, he breathed, and he refused to let her be the second person to die while he tried to save them. Her body convulsed. Water poured from her mouth, dark and brackish. She coughed, choked, gasped, and her eyes snapped open ice blue, wide, terrified, searching. She grabbed Leon's wrist with both hands, nails digging into his skin hard enough to leave marks, and stared at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to kill her. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Sirens wailed from somewhere far off, growing closer. Leon sat back on his heels, soaked through, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. He met her gaze for one long second. He did not know who she was. He did not know her name, her story, or what he had just set into motion. He only knew she was alive. Paramedics arrived in a rush of flashing lights and urgent voices, loaded her onto a stretcher, wrapped her in thermal blankets, checked her vitals while shouting medical jargon Leon did not understand. One of them turned to him and asked if he needed medical attention. Leon said no. He had to pick up Astrid. He was already late. They gave him a silver emergency blanket anyway, draped it over his shoulders like a cape, and watched him walk back to his car with water dripping from his clothes and forming puddles on the pavement. By the time Leon reached the school, Ruth Bennett was standing outside in the cold with Astrid beside her, both of them wearing identical expressions of worry and relief. Astrid's face was pale, her backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. She did not ask what happened. She did not say anything. She just reached for his hand still freezing from the river, still shaking, and held it all the way to the car. Leon turned the heater to maximum. Astrid watched the rain begin to fall, streaking the windows. When they got home, Leon made grilled cheese sandwiches that burned on one side because he could not stop his hands from shaking long enough to focus on the stove. Astrid ate hers in silence, taking small bites, glancing at her father every few seconds like she was making sure he was still there. At bedtime, she climbed into his lap without being asked, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "They said you saved someone." Leon nodded. She whispered, "I'm glad." Then she fell asleep with her head against his chest, and Leon sat in the dark, staring at the wall, listening to the city hum outside their window until morning came. The video went viral by sunrise. Someone with a steady hand and a clear view had filmed the entire thing, Leon jumping over the guardrail, Leon disappearing into the black water, Leon dragging the woman out, Leon breathing life back into her body on the frozen riverbank. Within 6 hours, the video had 500,000 views. Within 12 hours, 3 million. Within 24 hours, someone with too much time and an internet connection had matched Leon's face to a 12-year-old mugshot from the New York State Department of Corrections database. His full name, his conviction, The words robbery resulting in death appeared in articles with headlines that split down the middle. Half called him a hero. The other half called him an ex-con looking for attention, angling for a payout, staging a redemption arc for the cameras. The comments section was a battlefield. Once a criminal, always a criminal. Bet he planned the whole thing. Would you trust this guy around your kids? He literally saved her life. What's wrong with you people? The debate raged on, strangers arguing about Leon's soul while knowing nothing about his life. Leon sat at the kitchen table the next morning, phone in hand, scrolling through article after article. The glass jar labeled college sat on the counter, half full of crumpled bills that suddenly felt like not enough, would never be enough. He thought about Astrid at school in 3 hours, thought about the parents who would see the mugshot and the headlines, thought about Ruth Bennett who had always been kind but might now look at him differently. He thought about running. He had thought about it 1,000 times before, late at night when the walls felt too thin and the city too loud and the weight of his past too heavy. But running meant leaving Astrid behind, and that was the one thing Leon could never do. The police came that afternoon to take his statement. They were polite but distant, asking questions with the kind of careful neutrality that told Leon they knew who he was, what he had done, and were deciding in real time whether to treat him like a hero or a suspect. He answered every question. He signed every form. When they left, one of them shook his hand and said, "You did good." The other one just nodded and walked away. The knock came 3 days later. Early morning, barely 6 o'clock, pale winter light creeping through the window. Leon answered the door still half asleep and found Callista Sterling standing in his narrow hallway, flanked by a man in a dark suit who did not introduce himself but whose stance screamed military training. She wore a black coat that probably cost more than Leon's car, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that looked effortless but was not, her ice blue eyes steady and clear. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then her gaze drifted past him into the apartment, the kitchen table covered in Astrid's homework and colored pencils, the mismatched furniture salvaged from thrift stores, the glass jar on the counter with its childish label. She spoke carefully, each word measured, the way someone used to being quoted by reporters might speak. She thanked him for saving her life. She said she owed him everything. She said no words could capture what he had given her. Then she held out a thick envelope. Leon did not take it. He said, "I didn't save you for money." Her expression shifted, something real and raw breaking through the polished surface. She said, voice quieter now, "A stranger cared more about whether I lived or died than my own family." Leon did not know what to say to that. She set the envelope on the table between them and left without another word, her bodyguard following like a shadow. Inside the envelope were $50,000 in a certified check and a handwritten note on heavy paper, for Astrid's future. "You gave me mine back. C.S." Leon sat in the chair by the window, holding the check, staring at the number. $50,000. Enough to move them out of this building with its broken elevator and thin walls. Enough to enroll Astrid in a private school where the other parents would not know his face or his record. Enough to stop driving 12-hour days and start building something that looked like a normal life. But taking it felt wrong in a way Leon could not articulate, like turning his daughter's future into a transaction, like putting a price tag on doing the right thing. He thought about Marcus Holloway. He thought about the security guard's 3 children, who had been offered nothing when their father died. He thought about what it meant to be paid for saving someone when he had failed to save someone else. When Astrid woke up an hour later and found him still sitting there, she asked, "Did they say thank you?" Leon nodded. She said, "That's good. You're a hero, Dad." Leon shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do." Astrid looked at him with the kind of clarity only children possess and said, "But no one else did, just you." The first light of morning crept through the frost on the window, pale gold and fragile. 1 week later, Callista Sterling came back. This time, no bodyguard, no professional armor, no makeup. Her hands were shaking when she knocked. Leon opened the door and knew immediately that something had changed. She said, voice low and urgent, "Someone is trying to kill me." Leon told her to go to the police. She laughed, a bitter sound. "I did. They think I'm paranoid. Post-traumatic stress from the accident." She pulled a folder from her bag and spread its contents across Leon's kitchen table. Photos of her leaving Sterling Tower, each one marked with red circles around her head. Anonymous text messages. Accidents happened twice. Newspaper clippings with phrases highlighted in red ink. Sterling Empire crumbles without air. Billions at stake. Family inheritance in question. She looked at Leon and said, "You're the only person who didn't want anything from me except for me to stay alive." She made an offer. Hire Leon as a temporary driver and bodyguard. Move him and Astrid into Sterling Tower, into a secure apartment on the 20th floor with 24-hour security and restricted elevator access. High salary. Full scholarship for Astrid at the Sterling Academy. Everything he needed to give his daughter a real future. Leon's instincts, the ones sharpened by years in prison, the ones that had kept him breathing in places where breathing was not guaranteed, told him to refuse. Rich people were dangerous in ways poor people could not afford to be. Their problems came with lawyers and complications and consequences that could swallow someone like Leon whole. But his instincts as a father, the ones that woke him up at night worrying about Astrid's future and whether she would ever forgive him for the limitations he had placed on her life, those instincts told him to say yes. This was the kind of opportunity that did not come twice, he said. 1 week. Callista exhaled like she had been holding her breath since the river. She said, "That's all I need." Sterling Tower rose 73 floors above Midtown Manhattan, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. The lobby was floored in marble, so polished Leon could see his reflection walking across it, could see every stain on his jacket and worn patch on his jeans reflected back in high definition. The receptionist greeted them with a smile that managed to be both warm and professionally distant, the smile of someone trained to make everyone feel welcome without ever being truly friendly. Dante Brooks, head of security, met them at the elevator bank, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a military bearing and sharp eyes that took in everything. He shook Leon's hand with exactly the right amount of pressure, neither testing nor yielding, and Leon recognized the handshake of someone who had also done time in places where you learned to read people fast or paid the price. The apartment was on the 20th floor, 2 bedrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a kitchen with appliances Leon did not recognize, and countertops made of stone that looked like it had been quarried on another planet. The furniture was clean-lined and expensive, the kind of expensive that did not announce itself but was obvious in the weight and quality. There was a library on the communal floor, Dante explained during the tour, stocked with thousands of books including a children's section that Astrid would probably enjoy. That night, Astrid walked through the apartment touching everything gently, like she was afraid it might disappear if she pressed too hard. She stood at the window and looked out at the city spreading below them, lights stretching to every horizon, and whispered, "Is this real?" Leon said, "For now." She fell asleep in a bed 3 times the size of her old one, and Leon stood in the doorway watching her breathe, wondering what price they would eventually pay for this sudden elevation. Leon shadowed Callista through her days, learning the rhythm of her life. Board meetings in conference rooms that overlooked the city like kingdoms to be conquered, charity events where she signed oversized checks and smiled for photographers, press appearances where she spoke about the Sterling Foundation's latest initiatives with the kind of polish that came from media training and years of practice. She was 2 people, Leon realized. In front of cameras and crowds, she was sharp, controlled, untouchable, a woman who had been taught to see every interaction as a potential headline. But when the elevator doors closed and they were alone, when the performance ended and she could drop the mask, her hands would tremble. She would close her eyes and breathe deliberately, counting each inhale and exhale like she was trying to convince herself she was still alive. One evening, back at the apartment, Callista taught Astrid a few chords on the piano in the common room. Astrid's small fingers stumbled over the keys, but Callista was patient, guiding her through a simple melody. When they finished, Astrid pulled out her markers and drew a picture of Callista wearing a cape, flying above the city skyline, and labeled it Super Callista in crooked letters. Callista's eyes went bright with tears she did not let fall. Leon stood in the doorway watching them, and for the first time in years, maybe for the first time since Astrid was born, he smiled without thinking about it first, without checking to make sure a smile was the appropriate response. But something was wrong. Leon noticed it in small ways at first. Flynn Cole, the night security guard, asking too many questions about Callista's schedule, about when she usually went to bed, about whether she took sleeping pills or drank wine before sleeping. William Sterling, Callista's uncle, visiting every single day for exactly 30 minutes, always arriving through the main lobby with waves and handshakes, but always leaving through the parking garage where there were fewer cameras. Dante mentioned seeing unauthorized elevator access in the middle of the night, key cards being used that were not registered to any current employee, but when Leon asked about it, Dante waved it off as maintenance crews and system glitches. One night, standing on the rooftop terrace under a sky that glowed orange from light pollution, Callista wrapped her coat tighter against the wind and said, "I can't live like this forever." Looking over my shoulder, wondering if every meal might be poisoned, if every car ride might be my last. Leon said, "Then we stop reacting and start hunting. Find proof, not just fear." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since the river, he saw something like hope flicker in her ice-blue eyes. She said, "How?" Leon said. "We bait the trap. Make whoever wants you dead think they have an opening. Then we catch them in the act." The Plaza Hotel Gala was all crystal chandeliers and champagne, tuxedos that cost more than monthly rent, and evening gowns that whispered when women walked. Leon wore a rented suit that did not quite fit right in the shoulders, stood half a step behind Callista, and watched the room the way he had learned to watch in prison, always scanning, always cataloging, always ready. William Sterling arrived fashionably late, silver hair slicked back with expensive product, a smile that belonged on a politician or a predator. He embraced his niece with both arms, held her perhaps a second too long, and said something in her ear that made her stiffen. When he turned to Leon and extended his hand, Leon shook it. William's grip was firm, just slightly too hard, and he held it just slightly too long while his eyes communicated a clear message. I see you. I know what you are. Stay in your lane. On the ride back to Sterling Tower, Callista slipped off her heels, propped her bare feet on the leather seat, and said quietly, "If I die, he gets everything. The company, the foundation, the fortune, all of it." Leon did not respond. He just filed the information away, next to all the other pieces he had been collecting, and started building a plan. The plan had 3 steps: provoke, isolate, catch. First, provoke. Callista would leak carefully chosen information through channels that would reach William. She would tell her assistant, who would tell her uncle's assistant, that she planned to present financial irregularities to the board on Monday morning. She would mention, casually, that she had been working with independent auditors. She would post vaguely on social media about bringing truth to light and accountability starting at the top. It was bait, and they would wait to see who bit. Second, isolate. Dante would adjust security schedules, moving guards around, creating small windows of opportunity that looked accidental. They would disable a few side stairwells temporarily under the guise of maintenance. They would install additional motion sensors and cameras, hidden ones, in places that mattered. Third, catch. Callista would be alone in her apartment late at night, lights dimmed, doors unlocked, waiting. Leon would monitor from the security office, but stay close enough to move fast when the moment came. Callista said, "If he comes for me, I could die before you get there." Leon said, "If we don't drag the shadows into the light, someone else dies next month, next year, maybe you. Maybe someone else he decides is in his way." She nodded slowly and said, "Let's do it." The night came on Saturday, 10 days after the bridge accident. Callista sat at her desk pretending to work on her laptop, heart hammering so loudly in her chest she thought surely it would give her away. Leon watched the security monitors, every muscle coiled, ready. At 11:43, Flynn Cole left his assigned post on the 15th floor and entered the service stairwell with a key card that was not registered to him. A text message flashed on Callista's phone. Movement in stairwell. B. Someone just used override code on your floor. Then the soft sound of the apartment's deadbolt sliding open from the outside. Leon took the stairs 3 at a time, his breath fogging in the cold stairwell, sweat running down his spine despite the winter air. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel the old prison reflexes kicking in: assess, position, strike first, strike hard. He burst through the stairwell door into the 20th floor hallway, just as Flynn Cole stepped through Callista's apartment door, moving with purpose, holding a syringe filled with amber liquid that caught the light. Flynn moved toward Callista. Leon threw himself forward, slammed Flynn into the wall hard enough to crack the drywall, twisted his arm up between his shoulder blades until the syringe clattered to the floor. Flynn was younger, trained in corporate security tactics, and desperate enough to be dangerous. They fought in the narrow hallway, all elbows and knees and gasping breath, bodies colliding with furniture. Leon got him in a headlock and growled, "Who hired you?" Flynn gasped. "William Sterling." Said, "Make it look like an overdose. Drugs in her system. Everyone would believe it. Grief, pressure. She couldn't handle it." Sirens wailed from somewhere far below, rising through the building. Flynn broke free with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, lunged back toward Callista, grabbed the syringe from the floor. The needle flashed in the light. Leon stepped between them, putting his body in the path. The needle punched into his shoulder, tore through fabric and skin, and he felt the burn of the plunger being pressed, felt the heat of whatever poison spread through his veins like fire racing along gasoline-soaked fuses. Leon locked Flynn's wrist, despite the burning in his shoulder, drove him to the floor, held him there with everything he had left while his vision started to tunnel and his muscles started to seize. Dante burst through the door with 2 police officers. Paramedics swarmed in behind them, shouting medical terms Leon could not process. Callista's voice, distant and frantic, kept saying his name over and over. Leon tried to tell her he was fine, that he had done what needed doing, but the words tangled in his throat like broken glass. The world tilted sideways, and then it went black to the sound of a heart monitor beeping its steady mechanical promise that he was still alive. Leon woke to white walls and antiseptic smell and the soft beep of machines counting his heartbeats. Callista stood by the window, silhouetted against the gray morning light, her eyes red-rimmed. Astrid was curled in the visitor's chair, small and fragile, asleep with her head on the armrest. The doctor came in and explained in calm, clinical terms that the antidote had been administered in time, that the poison was a fast-acting sedative mixed with something that would have stopped his heart within 10 minutes, that another 5 minutes would have been too late. Leon tried to sit up and discovered every muscle in his body had an opinion about that plan. Callista moved to his bedside, took his hand carefully, like she was afraid he might break, and said, "You saved me again." Leon's voice came out rough and dry. "Not enough," she said. "More than anyone ever has. More than I thought anyone would." The news broke within hours. Flynn Cole, facing conspiracy to commit murder charges, had given a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. He detailed everything: the payments from William Sterling routed through offshore accounts, the emails with specific instructions on how to make the murder look like suicide or accident, the timeline of opportunities. He admitted that William Sterling had also poisoned Callista's father 3 years earlier, disguised it as a heart attack, collected his inheritance, and had been planning to eliminate Callista the same way as soon as the timing was right. The forensic accountants descended on Sterling Empire's finances like locusts. The FBI issued warrants. Within 48 hours, William Sterling was arrested outside his estate in Connecticut, and the footage played on every news channel in the city: silver hair, silver handcuffs. A man who thought his money made him untouchable, learning the hard way that it did not. Callista sat on the edge of Leon's hospital bed and said, "I'm creating a new foundation, Sterling's Second Chances. For people coming out of prison, people who need jobs, education, housing, support. People like you who deserve a chance to prove they're more than their worst day." She paused, looked down at their joined hands. "I want you to run it." Leon stared at her. She smiled, tired and real, and more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "You owe me a hospital bill anyway." Astrid woke up, saw her father was awake, and climbed onto the bed carefully, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pressed her face into his shoulder. She said, "They said you almost died." Leon said, "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay because you're here." She cried silently into his hospital gown, and Leon held her and decided that this moment, this child, this life, was worth every scar he had collected. 6 months later, Leon stood outside a courthouse in downtown Manhattan, wearing a suit that actually fit, watching William Sterling being led inside in handcuffs. The man who had killed his own brother, who had tried twice to kill his niece, who had smiled at charity galas and signed foundation checks while orchestrating murders. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The judge sentenced William Sterling to 30 years on multiple counts of conspiracy, murder, attempted murder, and financial fraud. When the gavel fell, Callista sat in the front row with her back straight and her shoulders steady. Leon stood behind her, a quiet wall of support. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them with microphones and cameras, and questions shouted over each other. But Leon and Callista walked through the crowd without stopping. In the car, Astrid looked up from her book and asked, "Is it over now?" Leon said, "Almost." The building in Queens had been a warehouse once, then a boxing gym, now something entirely new. The sign above the door read "Sterling's Second Chances" in clean, bold letters that caught the afternoon light. Inside were classrooms with new desks and whiteboards, computer labs with the latest equipment, meeting rooms with comfortable chairs, and a library that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The opening ceremony drew hundreds formerly incarcerated people looking for work: social workers, city officials, journalists, community members who wanted to believe in redemption. Callista stood at the podium in a simple blue dress and said, "No one can erase their past, no one can undo their mistakes. But everyone, every single person, can choose to do better in the present, can choose to build something good on top of something broken." Then she introduced Leon Carter, Director of Outreach, and said, "This man is living proof that one moment of courage can change the entire trajectory of a life. He saved mine twice. Now he's going to help save hundreds more." Astrid squeezed her father's hand so hard he thought his fingers might break and whispered, "That's my dad." Leon walked to the microphone, looked out at the crowd of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, all of them carrying stories he understood, and said, "Second chances aren't about erasing what we did. They're about building something better on top of it, about proving that one mistake doesn't define a whole life." The applause was loud and sustained, but what Leon heard most clearly was Astrid's voice, bright and proud and certain, saying, "That's my dad." That evening, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, they sat together in the library on the 4th floor. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, dust motes floating like stars. Callista sat beside Leon on the leather sofa, her shoulder touching his. She said, "You saved me twice from dying. But maybe I saved you too from the silence and the shadows, from hiding." Leon took her hand, laced their fingers together. "We found the way together." The kiss was not CPR this time. It was not about survival or drowning or breath being forced into lungs. It was a promise, freely given. Outside, the city hummed and honked and lived its loud, messy life. But inside a building in Queens, in a space dedicated to second chances and new beginnings, a man who had spent years running from his past finally stopped. A woman who had spent years hiding behind wealth and walls finally opened the door. And a little girl who had once asked her father if he was a bad person now knew without any doubt or question that he was good. The city does not forgive easily. It does not hand out redemption like participation trophies. It makes you earn every inch of grace. But sometimes, if you are willing to jump when everyone else just watches, if you are willing to breathe life into the drowning, if you are willing to stand between danger and the people you love, even when it might cost you everything, sometimes the city gives you something better than forgiveness. It gives you a chance to become someone new. And Leon Carter, ex-convict, ride-share driver, father, hero, director of a foundation built on hope, took it with both hands and held on tight.